Hi there. I'm so happy that you can join us tonight. Thank you for watching. If you find this conversation interesting, please share this live video. I'm Alexis Badenmayer. I'm political director of the Citizens Regeneration Lobby. Tonight we have three fantastic guests for you. They are all farmers who have gotten into politics, and two of them are running for election this year. David Zuckerman has been in public service since 1997, first as a state legislator and now as Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. David's leadership spans many issues, including renewable energy, affordable housing, living wages, cannabis reform, GMO labeling legislation, which is a cause that we worked on with Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman when he was a state legislator and when Citizens Regeneration Lobby was Organic Consumers Fund. So it doesn't go so far back, but we have that fund. David has also worked on universal health care, progressive taxation, marriage equality, and end-of-life choices. David farms at Full Moon Farm alongside his wife, Rachel Nevitt. They raise 25 acres of organic vegetables, pigs, chickens, eggs, and CBD now. And David and Rachel sell through their CSA and Burlington Farmers Markets. So David Zuckerman is running for governor of Vermont this year. Our next guest is Joe Maxwell. He is a founder and the president now of Family Farm Action. He is a fourth generation family farmer who served as Missouri state legislator and Missouri's lieutenant governor. He focuses his work on a vision of an inclusive US economy that works for all people, and he is always fighting the abusive power of monopolies, the monopolies that control our food and agriculture sectors. And then our third guest is Dr. Kathryn Bedell. Kathryn is a veterinarian, a regenerative rancher, and a business owner. She currently serves as a Mesa County representative on the Colorado Agriculture Commission. And now she's running for Mesa County Commissioner in Western Colorado. So thank you to the three of you for joining. I really appreciate you spending the evening with me. And what I want to ask you first, because for each of you, your original passion was food production. And I know you're still committed to feeding your communities, but you've decided to go into politics. So why would someone want to do that? Why is it important for farmers to be involved in politics? And I'd like to just hear each of your personal stories. So let's start with David Zuckerman, Vermont's Lieutenant Governor, running now for governor.
Thank you, Alexis. I appreciate it, and it's really an honor to be on this panel with the two others as well. It's going to be great tonight. I actually grew up in the Boston area, but in the summers in rural Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley, and we always had a big garden growing up, and I think that's part of what at first connected me to the just food world of, hey, David, go pick beans for dinner, dig potatoes, whatever. And I remember one childhood story of a friend who was there with us, and he was sent up to dig potatoes with me, and he was like, "Potatoes come from the ground? Oh my God, they're dirty. That's crazy." And so that's just sort of mind-boggling story to remember for me of how many people in this country don't even know where food comes from. And when I was studying at UVM and got turned on to politics by seeing Bernie Sanders speak in 1992, I was studying environmental studies and learned a lot about how agriculture was a huge impact on our environment, from our soil to our water quality to our air and climate issues. And really, the two have grown together. I started farming for others in 95 and started Full Moon Farm in 99. And I ran for office. I was asked to run in 94 and lost. Ran in 96 and won. And so I was a representative from a small district in Burlington, renting land, and started a small farm on just an acre of vegetables. And now you defined my farm, and I've become lieutenant governor over these 24 years. And I think they're just really related. Farming is something you invest in every day to achieve a result at the end of the season or the end of multiple seasons, depending on the crop or the animal. And in politics, sometimes you invest months and even years into some issues that eventually come to fruition, and sometimes don't, just as a crop can get wiped out by a storm. So I find really interesting parallels in patience and hard work in both.
It takes resilience. So let's hear from Joe Maxwell of Family Farm Action. You grew up on a farm, you're a fourth generation farmer, but you ended up becoming the lieutenant governor of Missouri.
Yeah, well, growing up on a farm in the Midwest, I have a twin brother, Steve. He is still the farmer. I show up and get to claim that I'm a farmer, but he is a true American Midwestern farmer. But when we were growing up, we just knew we were going to farm. We were the next generation. Plans were laid by my dad and my grandpa, and we were trained on how to be custodians of that which we were given. We saw ourselves and were trained by grandpa and my dad that, we are here but a small time period, just a small time in the creation. And the things that we have are under our control, and we must be caregivers of that. Leave the land in better shape than the day I took it, even though my grandpa and my dad did a good job. My job was to do better, to build on that, to care for those animals. We didn't eat until after the animals ate. They were under our care. And then we saw coming into the late 70s, early 80s, what we called the hog wars. We saw industrial agriculture come in. They begin to tell us in our trade magazines that we are not hog farmers or cattle ranchers. We're beef producers or pork producers. And everything began to change. We weren't to care for that animal. We weren't to care for that land. The industrial agriculture came in. And then they began to squeeze out farmers and neighbors like that had the values that my family had. And so one day I just said, enough's enough. And I walked into a member of Congress who was supporting our kind of agriculture. And I said, what can I do to help? And they said, stuff these envelopes. That was in the days of a lot of stuffing of envelopes. And so I stuffed envelopes until the cows came home. And then the next day I did something else. And before I knew it, they had me do other things and begin to speak. And I thought more of us have to get involved from agriculture, from production agriculture, farmers, ranchers, men and women on the soil need to get engaged. And so one day I ran for office and was a state representative, state senator, and then lieutenant governor. Then I commend the lieutenant governor here for running for governor, but I decided I like this side of the house, this advocacy. I like to spend every moment that I've been given addressing the abuses of these transnational monopoly corporations as they extract the wealth from our rural communities, extract all the natural resources and leave behind water that we can't drink, land that won't raise anything, and people living under the shadows of stench out of large CAFOs. So that's what I'm doing today.
Right on. Well, Kathryn Bedell, you joined public service by becoming a county representative on your state's Agriculture Commission, and now you're running for local office after having been a rancher and a veterinarian. So tell us your story. What made you think that it was very important to get involved in public service and politics?
Well, first of all, I didn't grow up on a farm or depending on agriculture for a livelihood. My father was an MD. He actually went to the University of Vermont in Burlington for medical school. But we did grow up in 4-H with our various animal projects, horses and sheep and rabbits and chickens and everything. So I sort of came in it, as a city person, really. But then I went on to vet school, was very into horses, and sort of ended up in Colorado on my way to a job in Ocala, Florida. But I ended up on a ranch with my husband in Western Colorado, and we were on what's called a split estate ranch. So we owned the surface and an oil and gas company owned the minerals underneath. And that's actually where I got my start in politics. I ended up getting appointed to the Garfield County Energy Advisory Board and lobbied for surface owners' rights and made the process a little bit fair between the surface owner and the mineral owner. So that's actually where I started. From there, when our Governor Polis was elected in November, the night he won, I sent in my resume from Western Colorado to be on his transition team. And I knew that not many people from the west part of the state had my experience and sort of my background. And lo and behold, I was selected. So I worked on his transition team shuffling through applications for the Department of Ag, Natural Resources, and Energy. And so that was really an eye opener for me. All these really qualified people applying for those cabinet positions and sort of going through that process was very impressive. So that sort of got me thinking about that my voice mattered and that I should do something in my local community. Although I had been involved in the local food movement here since 2006. At the farmers markets, advocating for more markets, talking about a food hub. So I was already fairly well known in my county around the local food and agriculture issues. And that's how I got my start.
That is a good way to build a following, to be producing delicious food for your community. People tend to know who you are. It's a good leap into politics. So Kathryn, in your local race, what are the big issues in your campaign?
Really, Mesa County is a very Republican county. It hasn't elected a Democratic person to any office in the last 12 years. So it was an uphill battle to start out with. And everyone's, saying, are you sure you want to do this? And then, of course, COVID hit and really changed how we had to campaign. And, honestly, by April, I was like, God, this is going to be totally different than I expected it to be when I decided to run for office, because I'm about human connection and I know the community. I like to get out and speak to the community, and doing it like this on Zoom or phone calls or anything, it's really not the same. But I felt pretty comfortable. I had a pretty wide base of support from both the small farmers and then as well as the more commodity farmers, because one of the things that's going on in Mesa County is our population is growing so fast and we're suffering from some sprawl, and people don't like to see agricultural lands being subdivided. So that's one of the big issues. I'm running against a developer, so it really puts that on the front page. So we'll see where people decide they want to go with that. And then, of course, we're in Western Colorado and water is always a huge issue. We're battling diversions to the Front Range all the time. We've been in an extreme drought. So learning how to do more with less water is really important. That's sort of the issues that we're facing in the county.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize for everyone who's watching how important it is to get involved in local politics and to know who's on the ballot locally. Some local races don't have party affiliations. You have to research the candidates before you vote. So we've got time to do that. And Kathryn, thank you for getting engaged, but it matters so much because, like you said, really the quality of our daily lives and how we live is determined a lot by these zoning issues, these planning issues. What sort of community are we going to have?
Right.
So how about you, David? You're running statewide for governor in Vermont. What are the major issues?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's on everyone's mind, of course, COVID in Vermont. Thankfully, we've been standing out as a pretty good shining star of how to keep COVID at bay. But ultimately, getting into the race, a lot of it was around the rural economy. Vermont's rural economy is struggling like rural counties all over the country. Manufacturing is dwindled over the last many decades. Near World War II, Vermont was a huge maker of parts for airplanes and machinery and tap and die stuff. And dairy has really been our big industry. We're the most single commodity agricultural state in the country. 70% of our receipts are all in dairy still. No other state, as far as I know, is over 50%. But Vermont has been diversifying pretty quickly because in part, dairy is really struggling. The last 4 or 5 years, the milk market order has just been a horrible pricing scheme that's really suffered Vermont farms. Many much larger farms in the Midwest and farther west, 10, 20, 30,000 cow operations. Vermont stopped making milk tomorrow and nobody would notice. We're only 1.2% of the nation's milk. So trying to really rekindle an opportunity for our dairies to move back towards a regenerative ag type of structure, as well as our broader ag sector, to create a diversified source of income for our farms to factor in the externalities. And where we have an advantage is our proximity to Boston, New York, Montreal, and Albany, a lot of population centers where our agricultural products, especially if they have a value add of more than being food, which is pretty darn important. But generally, local food, so it's picked riper and fresher, but also if it's grown in a more holistic way, will be a value add for the consumers, which are a key piece of this conversation. You know, what consumers choose to buy. And some have more liberty to choose than others, absolutely, with their economic circumstances. But those that have that liberty, choosing to put your literally money where your mouth is going to potentially change the outcome of the systems of agriculture, whether we're sequestering carbon and tackling the climate crisis, or whether we continue to be extractive, which is, you know, sort of the opposite of what, you know, Joe's family was talking about. We want to leave the soil better, not worse from generation to generation.
Now, Joe, you're following a lot of congressional races as well with Family Farm Action, which is a political organization that can endorse candidates and lobby. So, Joe, what races are you watching? What other races should we be engaged in where farm issues are coming up?
Well, the one I want to just mention today, first of all, as already been said, everyone should take the initiative. As I did, I walked into that congressman's office. I knew that he had been supporting the issues I believed in, and I just knocked on the door and walked in. Now, I know COVID's here and a lot has changed the way we campaign, but the theory is the same. So first, everyone should knock on the door, send the email, make the contact. It's not too late. Know who to vote for and take that action. It's not too late to let your neighbors know your why you support that candidate. Speak from your heart and tell why. I want to use one race as an example. There's an individual running, happens to be on the Democrat ticket in Iowa too. Now, we have been working seriously on policies that we try to push then into legislative packages. One of the bills that we're very happy that was filed by Congressman Ro Khanna and U.S. Senator Cory Booker is the Farm System Reform Act. This particular candidate took a look at that bill. We asked for support from candidates on our various policies and legislative packages. And she made a statement that she supported generally the policies contained in that legislation. And immediately her opponent went on the attack and spent money on a TV ad based upon her statement on that particular federal bill. Her name's Hart, and I would too. We really have to stick with those candidates and elected officials. We go out as advocates and we educate them on policy. We tell them the facts and our truth as to why these policies need to be adopted. They take a look at it, they run it through their channels, they come back and say, yes, this is the direction agriculture should go in. What's important is when they say yes, we don't go so quickly to the next candidate or the next elected official that we leave them vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. So in that race, we contacted farmers. We went to work to make sure that she had the farmer's voice as to why these were good policies. And we also wanted to do that because that's good on our policies. If she would lose based upon that issue, that sends a message to Washington, D.C. that, oh, stay away from those kind of policies because they'll get you defeated in states like Iowa. So that's one race we're looking at, and that's our why we need to engage, know who's running, encourage them to support your policies, stay in and get engaged and stay engaged. Don't leave them hanging. Work for them the day they say yes to our issues and work all the way until the day they decide to retire from Congress.
Can I add something to that for a second? Just, I think folks sometimes don't realize in these congressional races and a governor race in Vermont, which is about the same size, about 600,000 people, you know, we don't always have huge resources to do research. We don't have knowledge in every depth of every issue. You know, obviously as a organic farmer working in this arena, I have a little more than most of the people running for this kind of office. But whatever your passion is, and I think many of the viewers today are around food, food production, climate, soil, um, your knowledge on these issues is probably deeper than most of the elected officials out there. And you are a resource. And if you don't choose to make yourself available as a resource and put yourself in front of your legislators at the local level or the state level, just know that somebody else is. Smithfield is. ConAgra is. All that Monsanto is. All those big corporations, they have lobbyists. They're there all the time in the building, giving information to all of us in elected office. And really, those of you on the ground, if you develop a relationship and offer the knowledge you have, and it's reliable and it's factual and it can be backed up, that is gold for those of us in office who need people to call and say, do you know more about this? Because the other side is saying this stuff and I need a counter argument. So just know that your knowledge is really valuable.
We're getting some really good questions in the Q&A here on Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, you can put questions into the chat and my coworkers will help get those questions here on Zoom where we can see them. So there's a question here from Jonathan. It says, I work at Mesa Farm in Boulder, M-A-S-A Farm in Boulder. So Kathryn, this is one for you from Colorado. He says, we have a CSA and seed sales. I find, like so many others, that we work very hard, but barely make enough money to stay alive. What can you advise to help us not constantly struggle for money? Also, what are you planning to do in office to help the local small-scale farmers? So we'll start with Kathryn, but this is a question for each of you, and it's a question for all of us, because it was so alarming to me, as so many other consumers, to find out that really each bite of food we take, we're actually stealing money from farmers who weren't paid what it costs them to produce that food. And, it's just, well, I'll leave it there and let Kathryn respond to the question.
There's so many angles to this. First of all, value adding, so you're not selling a raw material, is really important. We've been working on that in Mesa County for a while. We want to bring back processing and manufacturing in the food sector to the county. So that's number one, making that sort of a market. Number two is just making more markets for those fruits and vegetables in their raw form. Right now, a CSA or a farmer's market's really your only avenue. We need to break up some of those exclusionary contracts that some of the distributors use, so people can get into those markets as well. Those distributors, it's the more you buy, the lower price you get. And so that's actually anti-competitive to the small farms. So we need to think about that as we go forward. I've run into that here in Mesa County, trying to get into some of the institutions that they just can't buy enough from me to make it worth my while, because then they break their contract with one of the big distributors. So that's something that we can do. But really, I would encourage people on those small farms to try and think about how they can add more value to it. Some of you might be selling to food manufacturers that are taking your product and doing something else to it. Well, do it yourself. Figure out a product that you can do, or get together with a group and own it for longer down the food chain, and that'll increase your profit.
How about David Zuckerman? You're an organic vegetable farmer too, so.
Yeah, we almost half our product goes out as CSA, another quarter or so at the farmers market, and we only wholesale to some local stores about a quarter of it, thankfully to sort of health food stores and co-ops who are prepared and willing to pay a better price on the wholesale than selling it to a distributor or to a massive chain. But it's taken 20 years to build it, and even when I started the CSA, there were about 4 of them in our county. And now there's about 60 farms selling CSA shares in our county, and the competition is quite robust, which makes the pricing really hard. Additionally, it used to be that only the health food stores carried our product. And now in Vermont, we're a very foodie kind of state. And most of the main chain stores are carrying organic. A lot of it is, sort of a different scale organic, and we can get into that conversation as well. But also because the local town stores are carrying organic and so forth, the convenience or inconvenience of CSA has become more of a hurdle than what people, when they could only get food locally from farms directly. So we're facing some of that. I'm not sure what the perfect answer is. I do think the value added side, just we're so diversified, it's hard to now also do some value added work. We are doing some with our CBD, we're making some salves. But trying to stay as much direct market as possible is one form of value add because you're not putting in the middle person. The other is adding labels, whether it's organic, regenerative organic, both those are also value added terms, but what the consumer doesn't always realize is they're also expense added terms. You know, growing food organically isn't just mean same product, better price. It's way more labor involved and pest management as well as weed management. But I don't have a silver bullet. I'd say developing markets, networking with others, trying to build a value for the consumers to recognize why they have to be picking what they're picking and buying from you, not the cheapest food from the grocery store as part of the US cheap food policy from the 40s. And this is a massive shift we're all working on together, I think.
Joe, I'd like to hear your perspective. I know this is a passion of yours as well.
Yeah. Well, one, I don't know this person's specific situation. I do want to say Kathryn is working diligently in organizing producers and looking at the opportunity for processing to elevate scale. To some degree, scale ultimately can give some opportunity for a portion of the production of agriculture. I've done a lot of work in the development of limited liability companies, LLCs, modeled after co-ops, depending on the financing structure, whether or not you want to go to a cooperative model or to an LLC. Now, a farmer, we're some of the most independent people out there, and sometimes that's to our detriment. One of the things I encourage folks to do is to look around and see other neighbors that are interested in the type of agriculture or the type of production or specific commodity or a specific product that you're producing, and work to get scale. So just one truck goes to the farmer's market instead of two trucks. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you do the numbers like we have with a business model, it can make a big difference in your profit, as well as one person every other week or whatever it might be can stay back on the farm providing labor to their own farm. So doing a rotational with your neighbors. So also look around, and maybe it doesn't have to be a formal cooperative model where you file something with the state Secretary of State's office or something. But my granddad joined in with the neighbors for threshing equipment, right? Not everybody owned one. So kind of thinking, how can we find some scale? What do we really need? Might be a solution. I don't know all the facts, but those are things that come top of mind as I listen to Kathryn and the governor answer the question.
Well, Kathryn, do you want to say any more? I know the question was from a vegetable farmer, but you're working with ranchers in your neck of the woods to see if you all can put together cooperative processing. Want to tell us about that now since we're on the topic?
Sure. So I started this process about 4 years ago with a USDA grant, rural development grant, to look at feasibility for a moderately sized 200 head a day slaughter plant here on the Western Colorado. Right now, everybody or most people sell calves and then they go to stockers and then go to the feed yard. So not many people are finishing cattle here, although that's changed. We have quite a few growers grass finishing here. But what's been happening here is since the pandemic sort of interrupted our food supply and the shelves did empty of meat, all of a sudden people were a lot more interested in that local supply. And at the same time, the cattle markets crashed. So the ranchers were interested in an alternative market for their cattle. So it was just sort of the stars aligning, and suddenly there's a lot of interest in building a local processing plant. The model has shifted a little bit away from the cooperative model that I imagined and a centralized facility. What we're aiming towards right now is remote modular slaughter units on ranches or in communities, and then trucking carcasses to a central cut and wrap that would, 5 or 6 of these slaughter units would feed into. and doing it all under one brand and doing all the marketing. So we'd have a large enough volume to sort of scale up. But the model is that the LLC or the owner shareholders would own it all the way until it hits the shelf somewhere. So they'll be taking the profit all the way along the point. So we're still working on that model. I think we will probably get it done inside 18 months. But we're waiting on a building that we're trying to buy on the Western Slope to do that cut and wrap facility in.
That's exciting to hear. I have been thinking about in Vermont after when COVID hit, we had about 25,000 pounds of carrots, and we thought normally we'd sell them through the next 3 months, and we sold them in about 3 weeks because of that crush for food. And it just made me realize that on our farm, winter storage about this time of year, we're peaked at about 100,000 pounds of food. We're a bigger farm in the area, and yet it's less than a pound of food for every resident of our county for one day. And
Yeah.
so part of what I'm looking at in our state is whether or not we can develop regional food processing and storage facilities so that the 3 or 5 or 12 acre farms don't all have to develop certified kitchens and storage and processing, but instead, each county having something where, you can have a more efficient operation and really have more food saved for that food resilience as much as we're also talking about climate resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that that this conversation is going on a lot more in a lot of communities. That's why I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to sort of step away from big food and big ag and really make this work for communities. I'm sure Vermont's a lot like Western Colorado. We have a lot of small towns, located pretty far apart. And so it's hard to get the ranchers together or the farmers together to have these conversations. And I think that's one of the real holdups, as Joe was saying. They're not used to working together. They're really independent. And suddenly, they're seeing that maybe we should work together. Maybe we can get more done. And so these conversations are going on a lot. And I'm really hopeful.
Yeah.
Yours might be a little farther apart than mine.
One of the things that comes top of mind that we really like is having conversations just like this, or the folks entering questions in. We need to understand what's going on the ground so that we can put our teams to work to help find the solutions. For instance, right now, country of origin labeling, as you know, as all of you all may know, was repealed as it related to beef and pork. USDA FSIS, the Food Safety Inspection Services, has a standard, a labeling standard that indicates that all I have to do is rewrap the beef and I can market product of the USA. That is going on today in America. When JBS, a Brazilian corporation, and the US opened back up for Brazilian beef to come into the United States, then JBS can compete with its US farmers, ranchers, by simply bringing in beef, burn down the rainforest, put more cows down there, bring in cheap beef, and trick the consumers by simply rewrapping it. And our US government, USDA, says that's okay. You rewrapped it here in this country, so that's a product of the United States. That's the kind of policy to help farmers and ranchers, Kathryn, that you're working with, or Governor, you might be, that, or anybody that's listening here. We've got to change that policy. Our farmers and ranchers need a fair market opportunity, and consumers need transparency, just like the governor passed legislation on GMO standards. I mean, that's leadership. That's the kind of leadership we need in Washington, D.C. on this issue and other labeling issues.
Well, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, can you tell us the story of GMO labeling? Because it's a wonderful David against Goliath type of fight for Vermont to pull companies like Pepsi to their knees and make them label their GMOs. How did you make that happen? You were a state legislator when you pulled this off.
Well, it's interesting. I introduced a package of 4 bills in 1999 around GMOs. Some folks might remember the Terminator technology. We had a bill to require reporting of GMO seeds bought and sold in the state so we could get a better sense of how much was being used in Vermont. And sadly, excitedly, we passed that. Sadly, when Washington, D.C. passed their DARK Act, not only did they undercut our GMO labeling law, but they removed our authority to do the seed reporting as well. So we had 10 years of data that we still have, but no longer are collecting. But it was really an amazing grassroots effort. I was a legislator from Burlington, the big city of Vermont with 30,000 people. And I would travel the whole state to go to living rooms, church basements, coffee shops, library meeting rooms, meet with 3 people, 12 people, 20 people, over time, 50 people, 70 people. Because my colleagues in the legislature were like, what is GMO? I don't even know. I put in bills and they'd be like, I don't even know what that is. And whatever, it'd be one of 1,000 bills that would get no attention. So I figured if I went around the state and met with people in people's districts, and then they got calls from their constituents saying, hey, I hope you'll look at that GMO bill. My political colleagues would come to me suddenly and go, David, I have a constituent who's asking me about some GMO bill. What's a GMO? And so then I became a resource for them. So the constituents I talked to leveraged that person into suddenly valuing the knowledge I had. And that upped my political value in the building. And over time, helped educate with those constituents many of those other legislative colleagues. And it took 15 years. We started in 99. We passed that bill in 2014. And there was a lot of pressure. There was pressure that none of the companies will sell things in Vermont. They just won't sell it here. And I said, really? So they're going to tell the rest of the country that they'd rather be opaque about what's in their food than sell in Vermont? You think that's a story that they're going to want in the national news, that they don't want you to know what's in their food? And eventually we got the legislature and the governor to sign it. And as you all know, it ultimately went into effect for about 3 weeks, technically in law, before DC, after $120 million of lobbying, pulled it out from under us. Some companies are still using the label, though. GM came along, General Mills, and some others, and they actually liked our law better than the Dark Act in terms of the clarity and simplicity. We had also passed a bill in 2006 to hold the GMO companies responsible for any cross-contamination cost to a non-GMO farm. But our governor that year vetoed that bill. It was one of the only times in Vermont there was a signing ceremony that was a signing ceremony to veto a bill because it was such a big deal. So we had a roller coaster on these issues, and I'll always be proud of the work we did on that labeling law. And someday we'll get Washington to get rid of the Swiss Cheese Dark Act and come back out with real transparency.
David, we need you to teach people to use their voice nationwide. It's like, because that's really a testimony about how a farmer's voice or a rancher's voice can make a difference. And if we would do that as a nationwide effort, we could get some of this stuff moving forward. So Joe, I appreciate your organization so much because I know that's what you're trying to do. And I'll amplify your voice every opportunity I get.
Well, I hope, Kathryn, that folks are in your community knocking on your door through virtual ways or emails, not like I did, and signing up to help you because you're a real thought leader in your community and building capacity with your knowledge and your skills. And that's what we've got to have on the ground. And it's got to be regional, it's got to be local, and it's got to be regional. The solution that works for David is not the solution that works for your ranchers and farmers. And these solutions can't be just one application of policy.
That's right.
So I hope they're breaking down the doors and getting you elected so you can make sure your farmers and ranchers have access to the resources that your local government provides to them.
We'll have the answers to all that in a week, right? Right, David?
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
David, the governor, in my state, we say governor, right, for lieutenant governors. I've got a story one day I'll tell you offline how I didn't know that, even though I was elected lieutenant governor and made a fool of myself. But I've done that before. The thing that is, that legislator that you were talking about contacting said, I had a constituent. Now, that's the
exactly
message
right.
I got in what you told all the listeners here. It doesn't take any more than that sometimes
Absolutely.
Cause that elected person, the system does work. They'll want to know. And of course, your leadership gave an answer within that Capitol. But I thought that was powerful when you mentioned that, legislators in the Capitol were saying, a constituent called me. And I
That's
think all
exactly
those
right.
people listening need to understand, make that call. We had a policy as Lieutenant Governor. If I had five, my staff took care of everyone. But if there were 5 people contacted my office on the same subject, it came to my desk. I didn't want anybody, I wanted to know 5 people out of the millions that we have here in the state of Missouri. And it makes a difference. So I thought that was powerful, how you explained that.
Oh, absolutely. And there are sort of those sign on to this petition, and you get a petition with 37 or 250, and those count. You should definitely do that. But when you pick up that phone and make that individual call, that says to me as an elected person, here is someone who's really passionate about it. And that's where your power is. I mean, money is part of power for sure, and it's awful how much power money has in the political process. But when you know someone has taken the time not just to click a little box to have their name added to a petition on an email, but picked up the phone and called, if you don't call them back, you also know that they're passionate enough about it. They're going to tell their friends, hey, I reached out to David Zuckerman and he didn't even call me back. And in Vermont, as a small state, that word travels fast. I don't know what every state's different on the size of your districts, but when you do an individual letter or call or write your own email, that ought to get attention. If it doesn't, you should make noise about it. You can write a letter to the editor and say, I reached out to my congressperson, my legislator, and I wrote him a thoughtful letter about this issue that I care about, and they didn't have the decency to call me back. You do that a couple times, they're gonna jump. I promise. They ought to.
Well, we've got a great question here. Robin says, I'm interested in you all as regenerative farmers. I am just getting started trying to transition a Midwest cornfield to regenerative in Michigan. What is your advice? And she wants to hear from each of you on how to improve her soil. She says, remember, there's corn right now, but by December, I can start doing something. What can you tell me? Who wants to start?
I'll go.
Yeah, go for it.
So if it's in corn right now, if once they cut the corn, if there's time in the season left, put a cover crop down. If there isn't, go ahead and put cattle on the corn stalks and they'll start fertilizing it, and get a cover crop in early in the spring as you can. And that'll start improving your soil. We have farmers out here that did exactly the same thing. And it's mostly our Mennonite population that started this off. And again, they're getting 3 crops and then running livestock as well on former commodity ground. So it can be done. And there's a lot of people starting to do that. So I really commend you, but cover that soil up after they get the corn off it, after they cut it, leave the residue, don't bale it, put the cows out there if you can, and keep the soil covered with cover crops and plant through it, no-till drill it, and work with the community that's already doing it, and go for it.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. My question was going to be, is this person interested in doing regenerative ag, with animals? Cows are obviously, and the ruminants are sort of the best. We have chickens and pigs, so I haven't gotten into the cows yet. My life just is going to explode my brain if I do everything. But we rotate our pastured poultry over our clover cover crop that was sown in the spring after the rye was coming up from the fall planting on our vegetable fields, so that the clover comes in, gets a little bit of an established. We run the chickens over it. Clover absorbs nitrogen really well, so that's helpful, and that builds up both carbon and nitrogen into the soil, so that when we mix that in for growing vegetables on, so it sort of depends on what your practice is and what kinds of animals you want to have. But I agree completely with Kathryn. You've got to get something on that. It's getting late, at least around here, to get any cover crops in for this season. but in the future, you want to make sure to cover that soil.
I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. The one addition might be one. I think this call was from, or this question was from Michigan. Is that right? There's a sustainable ag program there at, I think, Michigan State. So one, you ought to look at what crops grow best within for the soil type that you have, and for the weather pattern or the weather zone for which your cornfield is located in. So do some research. It may be too late to do the cover crop, but it's a great time to start that research to know what you can and what the proper cover crop or planting would be for next year. Second, another thing that's really growing now, capital investment for livestock, Kathryn mentioned cattle, can be a little intense for someone wanting to start out. You may not be able to start your cattle herd, but there are farmers looking more and more to cooperate with those that have tillable soil production to help convert those into regenerative agriculture, and will loan you. You can actually charge a little bit, or you can make a deal. We'll loan you cows to put on your land, so that you can have, even if you don't have the capital, you can have an intensive, diversified agricultural program by, again, joining in with the other farmer down the road, right? I mean, that's kind of my little theme here, right? So think outside the box, figure out what's going on, get with your sustainable ag folks, Extension and others, know what works in your zone, and look down the road to your neighbors and see who you can partner with to meet the full value, the full needs of regenerative type agriculture and soil health.
Yeah, this is all really very practical advice. It's about how to make the soil healthy so that you can grow crops that are healthy, that produce healthy food. But of course, this all has a climate benefit. So if each of you would comment on why agriculture needs to be part of the solution to climate change. And just to, I think it's somewhat controversial still, you all are talking about using animals in agriculture. Isn't that bad for the climate? So explain how this works when we're talking about benefits to climate change. Start with Kathryn.
So grasslands are the best carbon sequestration form that we have. They're better than trees. They're better than anything else. And grasslands and grazers evolve together. So grasslands are not healthy unless we have a grazer on that land. And if you watch sort of or study history at all, and I mean ecology history, that big herds of, in this country, bison moved across the country. They circulated around and maybe hit one area only once a year or not even every year. So it's that short-term intense grazing and then moving on that's so good at putting carbon into the soil and keeping healthy grasslands. So, and I was just doing some research on this about the emissions of methane from cattle. And what you have to remember is a lot of that research is done in the feedlot because the cattle are confined and it's easy to measure things. Cattle out in their natural habitat of grasslands emit much less. And it's actually, it's formed differently. So it's methane, but it's sort of, with a lot of other gases and on a lot of smaller level than what they talk about in the research. So that's really important for everyone to know. It depends on, you can't measure methane in a random cattle. You have to specify the growing situation of that cow that you're measuring the methane from.
Well, if you look at how the soils were built for centuries by, herding animals that roamed and went across the land between their grazing, their fecal matter, their hoof patterns and work. That's how we built our soil. So, and you really look at the historical nature of it all, it was a net plus of putting carbon into the soil. So for all the science and research, we can also just look at history and time. But there's no doubt in my mind, I was in a debate just a few weeks back with my counterpart, who's the current governor of Vermont, and we were talking about the climate crisis, and I said, I'd really like to make investments in our climate solutions. And I think there's an economic potential there between weatherization of homes, building affordable, efficient housing. So a lot of those around energy issues. And I said, in our rural areas, we can also start to really pay our farmers for sequestering carbon. And he said, well, we can't do all these things. It's going to cost too much money. And technologies are going to come at some point, and those are going to help us get through this. And I said, frankly, the technology is photosynthesis, and it's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. And if we utilize our land area in a way that is sucking carbon out of the air and we are putting it back in the soil, that's going to be one of the most productive and fastest ways to do it. I think there's a new movie out, Kiss the Ground, that it talks a lot about this, and there's some really great visuals about the amount of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, particularly in the spring when the tillage is just being done extensively across all of our lands in the United States, and how the northern hemisphere just explodes with emissions at that time, far more than any sort of cattle cycle. It's not like suddenly in the spring cows are farting more. It's the working of the soil that's releasing all this. So I think regenerative ag is critical not only for pulling it in, but also not releasing as much as we have been.
I would say first, every day I learn more about what I don't know when it comes to climate change than what I do know. But what I do know is that farmers and ranchers, whether they're in Vermont, Connecticut, Colorado, Missouri, wherever they are, Wisconsin, wherever they might find themselves, are on the front line of what we have done to our environment. Whether that's the hurricanes, whether that is the tornadoes, the storms, the thunderstorms, the wildfires, we're as farmers on the front line, and we must take action immediately. There's not, it's not too late, but the situation we're in, we may simply not eat, let alone not be able to farm. So there's not a higher priority than us addressing how we address the things we've done wrong in agriculture over the last at least 4 decades, 3 clearly. First, the things I do know. I like to think of my good friend Will Harris, White Oak Pastures, Georgia. Has I think 7 species. He'll yell at me if I get this wrong. Processes all of them on his farm. He turned cotton fields and soybean fields back into the lush, carbon-rich soils of the savanna of Georgia. There are stories and examples in America today how we can raise food, feed our neighbors, and be able to address the climate issues. And this needs to be a top priority as we go forward, or we're just simply not going to eat, let alone my farm's not going to survive because it's not going to be profitable in these extreme weather conditions.
I like to say that farmers can save the world because that's really the fact. It's like the way we do our agriculture can reverse all of this. So that's it. We can save the world.
We have the work ethic.
Yeah, the two of you all, are on the ground doing it right now. What we need to know in our organization is we want to learn from you and the Will Harrises and the others that we know. What's working, what's not. Our job is to listen to you all, to listen to the other farmers and ranchers, listen to folks trying to get it right, and find out what the hurdles are and help using our skill sets to remove those hurdles and to break up the monopoly control, the corporate control that keeps us in this monoculture type agriculture and all these farmers on this treadmill that they just simply can't get off of as they produce, overproduce, and sell commodities at underproduction cost. It's just insanity, the type of industrial agriculture model we have today, let alone the climate impact, just the insanity of over $40 billion in subsidies and bailouts will go to farmers to keep them afloat today. What farmers need is market opportunity and agricultural policies that get them into the type of market space where we raise food in a regenerative type fashion, in a climate friendly fashion, so that our neighbors can eat healthy, safe foods affordably.
You know, one thing that we have to remember is that asking farmers to invest any of their own capital or even take out loans to make some of these changes is an overreach. We can't regulate them to change because frankly, they don't have the capital to do it. Their margins are negative or real small. So somehow we have to help them facilitate that change. You know, they may want to, but again, it takes investment. And that's one thing that they don't have access to and that they don't have capital of their own.
Absolutely. We're the Farm System Reform Act, which I mentioned before that Rita Hart endorsed as a candidate in Iowa. We're spending, it's estimated that by the end of this year, 2020, between bailouts and subsidies, about $46 billion. Those subsidies need to be redirected. Right now, the majority of basic subsidies, not the bailout, but most of the bailouts went to soybeans as well, but it is to raise feed. There is a feed meat complex. What that means is most of the agricultural subsidies and bailouts farmers are either forced because of government programs, risk management tools, to either raise the feed for the JBSs. 85% of the market is controlled by beef market is controlled by 4 companies. 2 of them are Brazilian. And they either raise the feed for those companies so that they raise so much of it that those companies can buy that feed at below production cost. So who are we really subsidizing? The largest multinational corporations in the world, or we're borrowing millions of dollars to build huge CAFOs to house those same companies' animals.
Yeah.
So the bulk of farmers, a lot of the farmers throughout this country, now not David and not you, but the bulk of farmers are on this treadmill. They're either raising the feed for these global behemoths that are raiding extracting all the wealth, raiding our resources and destroying our land, or they're housing the animals in these big CAFOs, which are ultimately doing the same. And that's the story that we've got to break that up. And government is spending billions of dollars today. And you're right, Kathryn, it needs to be redirected, because if I want to go organic, I've got to set aside for 3 years. I may not be in a financial situation based upon the droughts and all the problems to be able to make that hurdle. But why, instead of spending that money for JBS, those billions of dollars, why don't I do a lease program and the federal government use some of those subsidy dollars so that those farmers can make that jump into organic type practices? That's how we have to think, not only for the health of the family farm, the financial health for family farmers and ranchers in our community, but the health of this planet.
Absolutely with you 100% on that. And that's exactly what we need people to say to their legislators.
I was going to throw another complete curveball in around many of our farming compatriots. Some are fairly conservative and they have issues right now. We're talking about immigration and migration and so forth. Well, when you look at the driving cause of populations of refugees and people moving around this planet right now, the core of it is the climate crisis. It's either desertification or it's rising sea levels. And so you could almost turn it on some of our colleagues who may have a different lens on some of those issues and say, well, actually, if you tackle the climate crisis, you're going to help reduce some of the world refugee challenges that are some issues that you might have. So I think there's ways. I mean, one of the things that I'm actually sitting in a circular room. I live in a silo, 2 silos next to each other. But that I often will say to my colleagues, I live in silos, but I don't think in silos. And we've got to connect these dots of, migration issues, climate crisis, economic injustice in our farming systems, as was just talked about in terms of the subsidies. How do we develop rural economic development? And as Kathryn's talking about, with cooperative systems between a few different farms and the processing and the storage infrastructure. There's no one of these things is not like the other. We're interrelated in so many ways. And I've sometimes said, just like all the microorganisms in the soil, if you think of it as just sort of a medium to put chemicals in and get food out, that's one set of thinking. But really, the soil is much healthier with the range of microorganisms, and we're much healthier with a range of networks in our communities about the growing and the consuming of food.
Well, each of you has been so generous with us, with your time tonight. And so I don't want to keep it past an hour. There are still questions left in the chat box. Maybe some of those can be a conversation that continues on Facebook. But I think we should say good night for now and keep this conversation going. I did do longer interviews with Kathryn Bedell and David Zuckerman. So you can find Kathryn Bedell's interview on our Farmers and Ranchers for the Green New Deal program at Organic Consumers Association. The video is up on Facebook at Organic Consumers. And with David Zuckerman running for governor of Vermont, he and I chatted here at Citizens Regeneration Lobby. So this video will be even easier to find. And Joe Maxwell at Family Farm Action. Thank you. I hope we get to do more events like this together. This was a great team. And now our job is to find more people like Kathryn and Joe and David who are running for office and to support them. That's the last thing we have to talk about tonight. We do live in a messed up political economy where it costs money to run for office. We don't have publicly financed elections, and we have corporations pouring gazillions of dollars into our races. So that's just the fact. And that means that those of us who can, we need to donate what we can to as many candidates as possible and make those small contributions that get campaigns going. It's actually better for more of us to make small contributions than for someone like Jeff Bezos, to buy an election. He's only one vote. But if we can get our communities, all of us, to make small contributions to candidates like Kathryn Bedell running for Mesa County Commissioner and David Zuckerman running for Vermont Governor, we can make these shifts happen. Well, thanks, guys. I hope we do this again sometime soon. Thanks so much.
Good luck to you, Kathryn and David, a week from now.
Thank you. Look
Absolutely.
forward to talking to
Pleasure
you
for
again.
running.
Thanks.
Thank you. What a pleasure talking with both of you. This has been great.
It has been really a pleasure. Thank you.
You're both
Bye-bye.
inspiring.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you for allowing us to be on for Organic Consumer Association.